You just realized your business needed to hire someone yesterday. How can you find amazing candidates fast? Easy. Just use Indeed. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. With Indeed sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates, so you can reach the people you want faster. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Don't wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. And listeners of this show will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/PODKATZ13. Just go to Indeed.com/PODKATZ13 right now and support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this podcast. Terms and conditions apply. Hiring? Indeed is all you need.
Welcome to Family Law Talk. Family Law Talk. Presented by Kirk Stange of Stange Law Firm, PC. Stange Law Firm is a multi-state family law firm. Now, here's your host, Kirk Stange.
Welcome to Family Law Talk. We have an interesting topic today. The topic is the debate over no-fault divorce. And this episode today is based on an article on my blog, familylawheadquarters.com, dated February 18th, 2025. And the title of the article is, Should No-Fault Divorce End? So as a follow-up to the episode today, go on over to familylawheadquarters.com and read this article for more information. But let's go ahead and jump into the topic at hand. The reality is no-fault divorce is becoming sort of a debate in political circles, okay? Many politicians have really began making comments about no-fault divorce, expressing opinions about no-fault divorce, and a lot of the opinions and a lot of the pontificating, if you will, which is most recent, is sort of negative on no-fault divorce, like sort of a yearning for days of the past where parties had to show fault to get divorced. So to give you a really quick historical synopsis, no-fault divorce began in 1969 in California when then Governor Ronald Reagan signed it into law into California. Okay, so this was a new thing. Thereafter, states started implementing it and passing laws allowing no-fault divorce nationwide. As we sit here today, every state in the United States allows for no-fault divorce. So presently, sitting here today, parties don't have to show fault in order to get divorced, okay? What parties have to show in order to get divorced, and the exact verbiage is going to vary based on state, but in a general sense, most state statutes say something similar to this, which is parties have to show that there are irreconcilable differences that exist and that there's no reasonable likelihood that the marriage can be saved, all right? So we're not placing blame. We're not saying it's anybody's fault. We're just saying the marriage can't be saved and that there's differences, and these differences are irreconcilable or irretrievable, and that the marriage cannot be saved. And so based on this legal standard, lots of parties got divorced, and they got divorced without showing fault, okay? And this was different. Prior to 1969, parties had to come into court in order to get divorced, and they had to show grounds, or they had to show fault. And this could be adultery, could be domestic violence, abandonment, mental cruelty. Some states had other specific grounds, but in order to get divorced, it wasn't enough to say our differences are irreconcilable and we want a divorce. You had to show grounds in order to get divorced. So prior to 1969, a totally different ballgame in the United States. So if parties wanted to get divorced and there were no grounds, they couldn't get divorced. At least that's the way the laws were stated in states in the United States prior to 1969, okay? So a court could deny a divorce even where both parties wanted it simply because grounds weren't shown, okay? And so today, with the advent of no-fault divorce, it's a different ballgame, right? So where both parties want a divorce, almost every court is going to grant it. Again, the legal standard is just simply that the marriage is irretrievably broken or there are irreconcilable differences and that the marriage can't be saved. And so in almost every circumstance where both parties want a divorce, the court's going to grant it. Now, there's some nuances to that, like if if the wife is pregnant while divorce is pending, and in most states you can't get divorced until that pregnancy is over. Okay. In some circumstances, a party can contest a no-fault divorce. So one party could file for divorce and say the marriage is irretrievably broken. There's no reasonable likelihood it could be saved. The other spouse could contest that and say, no, I think this marriage is savable. In a general sense, if one party wants a divorce, I mean, most judges are going to grant the divorce. The one exception I've seen come to light in some cases is circumstances where the parties are still engaging in sexual relations while the divorce is pending. Maybe they're going on dates and still behaving in a way that's sort of husband and wife like. And so in those kinds of circumstances, a judge can deny divorce if one party doesn't want it. But again, the vast majority of the cases, both parties want the divorce. They both say the marriage is broken, and then the divorce is granted. All right. Well, recently, and this has been going on for some time too. I mean, this has been going on, really for years in a lot of respects, but there has been recently sort of a higher amount of debate over this topic where politicians are critiquing no-fault divorce, and the critique can center around the fact that this has led to the breakdown of the American family. Some individuals would say that this isn't good, and that parties should work harder to save their marriage, and that marriage is really a covenant, and it shouldn't be, dissolved absent some sort of fault. Okay, and there's been some politicians that have really come out and made comments along these lines. And again, I'm not taking sides in the debate. I'm just trying to give you the background. But Vice President J.D. Vance has made some comments along the lines of being skeptical about no-fault divorce. Speaker Mike Johnson has made some statements in Missouri, where I reside. Senator Josh Hawley has made some comments critical of laws that make it easier for parties to divorce. And again, they can all defend their own comments in terms of how far, they'd be willing to go there. Some would just say they're just generally expressing skepticism. They're not really advocating changing the laws. Obviously, others in political circles take their comments more from the perspective of, oh my goodness, they might try to change no-fault divorce and take it away. And again, I don't know what these politicians' true motives are, true desires are, but they've just made comments sort of skeptical of no-fault divorce, at least based on what I've read. And then others have been really critical about it. Now, President Trump has been divorced twice in his lifetime. He hasn't come out in favor of abolishing no-fault divorce, at least as far as I know. And then know as well, divorce laws are state laws, so the federal government would seemingly have no ability to change state laws on this topic. But in theory, states across the country could. So if states pass laws abolishing no-fault divorce and governors in particular states sign that, then in theory, there could be changes in terms of how divorce takes place in the United States, okay? So, really the next question here is, should no-fault divorce be abolished? And again, in this podcast today, I'm not going to take sides. This is for the listeners to decide where they're coming from here on this topic. But what I want to do is just give you some of the reasons against abolishing no-fault divorce, give you some of the reasons for abolishing it. And then in terms of this podcast, you all decide where you come down on this debate. And certainly you could listen to a lot of other podcasts out there on this topic or read other articles on it and get more information. Maybe there's arguments for and against that I'm not going to reference today, but I'm going to reference some of the big ones I've heard. Okay, so in terms of the arguments against getting rid of no-fault divorce, one of the most common arguments are this, which is, look, courts are backed up already. To get divorced, even in a no-fault system, it could take parties many months, sometimes more than a year. And a lot of the listeners might say, well, why does it take so long to get divorced? Well, look, not enough judges in a lot of localities, a lot of parties backing up the court system. And then on top of that, in order to get divorced, it's not as simple as both parties wanting a divorce. Parties have to agree on the terms of the divorce in order to get divorced in most states. Now, some states might bifurcate where they allow the divorce and then they deal with the disposition later. But in most states, from my experience, that's not the case. So to get divorced, parties have to agree on how they're going to divide all their marital property and debt. If they have kids, they're going to have to agree on child custody. They'll have to agree on child support. They have to agree on spousal maintenance. And then they have to agree who's paying what in terms of attorney fees. Does each party pay their own? Does one party pay the others or contribute to the cost of the others? In the disposition, these details are what can cause a lot of parties to get hung up. They can't agree on the details. They might even agree on 70, 80% of it, but maybe 20, 30% of it, maybe even 10% of it, they can't agree on, and it hangs up the entire divorce itself, okay? So if you add fault into the equation, and to get divorced, you have to prove fault, that's going to make it even more difficult because nobody's going to want to admit, I shouldn't say nobody, but most parties are not going to want to fall on the sword and say, yeah, we're getting divorced, it's all my fault. I was the bad one, right? So to get parties divorced, what that's going to require is a hearing in most instances where parties are airing their dirty laundry. They're finger pointing at each other, saying it's your fault, no, it's your fault, and they're going to go through all the facts, all the circumstances, and then in order to grant a divorce, a judge has to find somebody at fault. Maybe the judge finds both of them at fault, but somebody's got to be at fault if no fault divorce goes away. And when you think about it, this is really going to back up the court system even more. It's going to cause cases to become enormously more expensive. Is a divorce lawyer, a family lawyer, I think the lawyers are going to make more money under this system because, I mean, right now you don't have to prove fault. But if you got to prove fault, then the lawyers are going to have to put on evidence. They're going to have to do discovery as to fault. They're going to have to bring in witnesses as to fault. And that's going to result in a longer divorce process. Lawyers are making more money, more dirty laundry being aired, probably harder feelings between the parties, okay? So this would be a major negative in terms of doing away with no-fault divorce, okay? Here's argument number 2 that I've heard is if you've got to prove fault to get divorced, and if you're somebody who wants to get divorced, it almost incentivizes you to commit fault, okay? So let's say you want a divorce, but you've never done anything wrong that would be marital fault. Well, go out and have an affair. Now you can get divorced. Go move out. Abandon your spouse. Now you can get divorced. Okay, you want to get divorced, now say some really nasty things that could be mental cruelty, now you can get divorced. So again, the argument is it really encourages people to behave badly in order to get that divorce, which is, a little bit unsavory. Is this what we want? Do we want to encourage people to do bad deeds to get divorced? Okay, this would be another argument against doing away with no-fault divorce, okay? Another very common argument that I've heard it regards domestic violence victims, okay? So somebody who's a domestic violence victim, let's say they want to get divorced. In order to get divorced, they're going to have to prove fault. They're going to have to prove the domestic violence occurred and whatnot. That can be very hard on a domestic violence victim, right? To go into court, face the person who's committed violent acts upon them, testified to it, put evidence on as to it. That could be very psychologically harming. And the argument is that a lot of individuals who are domestic violence victims, they'll stay married and they'll be very unhappy. But they'll stay married because they simply don't want to face down the perpetrator of the bad acts on them in a courtroom, right? It's very difficult. It's very hard. So now we're sort of forcing domestic violence victims to stay married to the person who's abusing them. And do we really want that? And of course, domestic violence could be female to male, but in the political circles, the debate is that this is bad for women, that more commonly the victim of domestic violence is the women. So now we're making women who are abused stay married to the person who's abusing them, and that this is very bad, okay? So these are 3 arguments against getting rid of no-fault divorce, okay? In terms of the arguments for getting rid of it and going back to pre-1969 days, okay, the arguments are this, at least the ones I've heard, that, look, kids grow up in broken homes, parents are getting divorced, this isn't good, and it's better if kids have 2 parents, and we've made divorce way too easy, and now we've got so many kids in society growing up in broken homes, and this isn't good, so let's make it harder for people to get divorced. That way kids grow up with 2 parents, okay? That's the argument. Again, Obviously, others would take issue with that argument and say, is this what we want? Do we want to force people to stay married when they're unhappy? But in some circles, people would say, in essence, yeah, people should work it out. You entered a covenant to get married, and happiness isn't everything. At the end of the day, you owe it to the kids to stay married, okay? Again, I'm just giving you the arguments. Another argument is this, which is, look, parties should be required to attend counseling and maybe live separately for a very long period of time before getting divorced. Like in some jurisdictions, very, very short separation requirements, right? Very short waiting periods. And so, some people would argue, okay, maybe we keep divorce no fault, but let's make people be separated for a long time. Like you hear some folks talking like 2 years, people should be separated before divorce should be granted, okay? Let's give people more time to save their marriage, reconcile, and let's not have these waiting periods and separation periods be so short, okay? So that is another really common argument in terms of required counseling and extended separation periods. I know some states have longer separation periods than others too, by the way, already. And then again, some would argue, just generally no-fault divorce ought to go away as a whole. It's just bad. When you get married, it should be for life. It's a covenant. You shouldn't be able to break that covenant absent fault. And of course, people get into religious views, and they cite those and say absent fault, court should make people stay married, okay? Again, I'm not trying to take sides here. I'm trying to give both sides of the equation, let you know the arguments for and against it. Certainly as a follow-up to this episode today, you can listen to other podcasts, do more research, get other perspectives on this topic. But it's definitely an interesting one, and one that you see out there more and more today, with folks really taking issue with the concept of no-fault divorce, all right? As a follow-up to the episode today, go on over to familylawheadquarters.com, read the article dated February 18th, 2025, titled, Should No-Fault Divorce End? This will give you more information on this topic. Thanks for tuning in today. Stay tuned for our next episode coming up on Family Law Talk. Thank you very much.
Thank you for listening to Family Law Talk with Kirk Stange. Visit StangeLawFirm.com for more about today's topic, or to put Stange Law Firm to work for your family today. The choice of a lawyer is an important decision and should not be based solely on advertisements. Neither the Supreme Court of Missouri or Illinois reviews or approves certifying organizations or specialist designations. The information you obtained in this podcast is not, nor is it intended to be, legal advice. You should consult an attorney for advice regarding your individual situation. We invite you to contact us and welcome your calls, letters, and electronic mail. Contacting us does not create an attorney-client relationship. Please do not send any confidential information to us until such time as an attorney-client relationship has been established. Past results afford no guarantee of future results, and every case is different and must be judged on its own merits. Kirk Stange is responsible for the content. Headquarters, Office 120 South Central Avenue, Suite 450, Clayton, Missouri 63105. Kirk Stange is licensed in Missouri, Illinois, and Kansas.